Thank you, Madam Clerk. I will go on your watch. I'll call the Tuesday, February 8th. Village of Port Edwards Board meeting to order, and I would ask the clerk to please call the roll.
Okay, trustee Duncan.
Here.
Trustee Brendan. Here. Trustee Mansell. Here. Trustee Mitchell.
Here.
And trustee Taylor.
Here.
Okay. Pledge of Allegiance. If you would please rise and face the flag, and we'll have a brief moment of silence after to honor our military veterans. I
Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for states, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice.
Thank you very much. Please repeat it. I'll entertain a motion to approve the consent agenda, which is the meeting minutes from 11 January 2022 board meeting and the vouchers, monthly bill, journal entries, etc.
So moved.
Got a motion by trustee Mitchell,
Second.
second by trustee Grundon. Anybody wishing to pull one of the two off for further discussion? Hearing no request to do so, all those in favor of approving the consent agenda as written, signify by saying aye. Opposed? That motion carries. Do we have public comments on agenda items? Anybody?
No public online.
Okey dokey. You're not the public. President's report, I have nothing, and the airport commission is in the process. In April, we will be going ahead with the new fuel system, and our fuel system has gone up quite a bit with the people coming in and purchasing fuel, and a lot of that is directly related to Dan Valley. And the other thing, the tree removal, the hazards, that is moving, but moving pretty well. The landowners over in the area of Wisconsin Rapids off 3rd Street South have been pretty receptive to it, and most of them, if they are affected and trees will have to be removed at our expense, of course, they don't want them topped, they want them taken out, which is a smart thing to do. So. And moving on from that, Boz, did you hear anything? They didn't have a meeting last month for police and fire. Did you talk to the chairman at all?
He's looking at a early March meeting based on a possible candidate that's coming up through the fire department.
Okay, and then that will also, in the March meeting, we'll have to swear in, they'll have Andrea.
Yep.
Wyland, so if you would make a note on that, sir, please, I appreciate it. Moving into Public Works.
We held our last meeting on January 20th, sort of a realignment, sort of because of the loss of John. So we went through Public Works updates, just kind of re-looking at those projects again, which included 4th Street from Bruner to Seneca, a resurface 3rd Street, a complete rebuild, Port Road and Seneca Road, obviously done jointly with the town of Seneca and the town of Port Edwards, resurfacing. We'll look at alleys if we have any money left at the end, well, near the end of the year. We're also looking at Market Avenue and the municipal building and seeing what we could do there. Public Works crew has decided they can do some of that and make the cost, which is estimated at about $200,000, make that a little bit less. Under old business, we talked about the cost of winter plowing. And it looks like in 2021, we spent, I think, about $23,000 for salt, and labor must have been about $17,000, somewhere in there. So going forward, we'll see what 2022 brings. We had a discussion about possible repairs at the corner of Verbunker and Monroe. And that's gonna be an expensive project because it's somewhere $300,000 plus. So looking at how we can fund that into the future, this is not next year, or not this year, I'm sorry, I'm thinking 2022. This will be a future year. Under new business, we discussed adding a generator for emergency operations to one of the village water wells. And also a generator to have available for the operations in this area as well too. And there were also updates done to codes to make it so that it's Port Edwards codes for the building codes rather than saying Wisconsin Rapids. So it's now our own. And that was not approved or disapproved in our committee. That went on to Pitt then with those recommendations. We had one correspondence. Our next meeting is on the 17th of this month at 4.
Any questions for Chairman Mitchell? Hearing no requests, Parks and Recreation, please.
We met January 27th. The bigger ticket item was renaming or naming for the unnamed park, which we ended up voting as for Triangle Park, because that seems to be what the community knows it as the most. So we didn't really want to fight that one too hard. And then we discussed the tree and the plaque for trustee Bingham. And then Ben looks like he's going to get together some ideas on where to plant that. Legacy grant submitted for the Riverwalk Park. Otherwise, that was about it. Any questions? Anybody? And our next meeting is February 24th at 4.
Thank you, Chairman Mansell. Where are we here? Public safety.
We met February 1st, went through the police report, the fire report. Talked about our class that we now have to take that we started last night for a little bit. And the youth apprenticeship stuff, which we submitted information to Kelly for the grant. That's about it. Next meeting is 1 March at 4 p.m.
And if you wish there, Chairman Taylor, you could go right on into FHR.
FHR was a very long meeting.
4 minutes.
It was a Weller meeting. I really liked it.
We just had an update on the sewer damages, on the insurance stuff. That's pretty much it, in and out in a couple minutes.
What was it?
Mr. Duncan was barely even on. What's that?
What was it, 4.5 minutes?
It was Dana saying, hi, I'm here, and we're adjourned. So.
Yeah, I had updated my password and I forgot it. And I had to look it up. By the time I did, you were almost done.
4 minutes, 3 minutes, something like that. Yeah. So our next meeting is 3 March at 4:30.
For 5 minutes this time?
Huh?
For 5 minutes this time?
Well, we got stuff to talk about. We'll talk about it. That's all I have.
Okay, Dana, we saved all the work for you tonight, so.
Yeah. Then on February 3rd, one of the things we discussed was whether we are going to have some consensus about a sexual offender ordinance, which is why it's on new business. I'd like to know kind of the board's thoughts on it before we spend time preparing it. Other than that, I have 3 motions to change the ordinances. I'm going to combine them.
Without objection, please go.
Any objection? Then I will do so. I will move approval of the modifications to chapters 8, 15, and 16 of the village ordinances.
Second.
Who was the second? Tara,
Tara.
thanks. Okay, motion by Chairman Duncan, second by trustee Grundon. Discussion. Hearing no request to speak, all those in favor of the motion to approve chapters 8, 15, and 16, please signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? And carries.
That's we meet next month, isn't it? 3rd of March?
Pretty much.
Correct.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it always matches, whatever meeting we have February automatically matches in March
Correct.
because of the way it falls. So,
You go back to your sexual offender ordinance discussion.
We're gonna move over to item 8, unfinished business from the previous meeting. Anybody have anything on that? Okay, hearing no request, we'll move down to section 9, new business. Before we get started on anything from the trustees, if they have new business. Dana, when we get to item 9, B as in boy, I would ask you to take over for
that's
that.
fine.
Any comments from the trustees for late breaking business or issues that need to be referred to a committee for discussion action? Hearing no request, I turn the meeting over to Chairman Duncan.
Well, there's been some discussion within the PIP committee as to whether we should pursue a sexual offender ordinance. We have some draft language that was provided from council. Before we expend a large portion of time kind of come up with something, I guess I would like to know some sort of a consensus of the board, whether it's an exercise in futility or whether it's something that we should be pursuing. So,
Can we do it? You know, that's the big question.
I personally will never vote for it because I don't think it's constitutional. I always made a joke of the fact that every year when the school board or the village board, I swear to uphold the Constitution of the United States. And I'm like, yeah, that's ever gonna happen. Well, it is. And quite frankly, I don't think it's constitutional. I've read the law. Our council agrees with me on my assessment. I think that there are things we could do that are not per se. For example, we could indicate that registered sex offenders need to have or disclose to their probation agents that they're going to be on a public park or public activity, so that police could then stop them and inquire so that they know that they're being watched. If they haven't notified their probation agent, they can be arrested or for violating the ordinance. If they say they've been notified their agent and haven't, then there's a probation hold for them violating or lying to law enforcement and what would be the equivalent of an obstruction of justice charge. That I think would pass because there you're exercising discretion and limiting contact or behavior as opposed to limiting where somebody could go.
I guess my biggest concern is the amount of time that we were made aware before somebody was coming in. You know, if they give you on anything, you want to quit your job, you gotta give a 2-week notice at least. And I think it seemed like we had a thing in the door and then they're moving in. Not that we can force them to say yes or no when you got family houses and stuff available. I would just like, could we be part of the decision-making process of where they're gonna put them? You know, I don't think all the details were put on the table where they placed him. I mean, I know we can't do nothing in the past, but just the future.
Oh, I forgot, speak freely.
Okay.
I forget what I was.
There's a couple things that I think that before we make a decision as a board, we all need to have all the more information. One of the articles that I came across from the league by Claire Silverman outlines one of the recent cases that was brought a lot of attention. And if you don't mind, if I could read, they talk about such ordinances are increasingly common. A court decision underscores the importance of the following. One, understanding the permissible purposes for enacting such an ordinance. Protecting public health, safety, and general welfare is permissible, whereas a purpose to ban all or most sex offenders from the community is not. So obviously we would, we can't ban sex offenders. Basing the decision to regulate sex offender residency on evidence or data justifying such regulation. And 3, drafting the ordinance narrowly to achieve the permissible goal. 4, the need to proceed correctly from the onset. So in this article, it's about Sun Prairie, and it was such an egregious overreach. It was asking for it. So a class action lawsuit came. For instance, some of the things that were in there was a 3,000 feet buffer zone from prohibited locations like parks, trails, everything else. Things that were just beyond overreach, absolutely targeting and creating a scenario that basically said no sex offenders. The thing that I would like to see is some level of oversight that would, regarding our parks, our disc golfing that is the woods, that is completely isolated, where if we said, no child sex offenders, and I'm not presuming to know how this should be, but loosely speaking, if we had a goal to say no child sex offenders in these child safety zones, and if we did it narrow enough, from the stuff that I'm reading and from what other ordinances and other villages, if we do it narrow and not just this broad, we can't do it in a punitive nature. And that's in this article, when they outline that, they just were so blatant. The chief of police, after they created this ordinance, basically said to 6 people, y'all got to move on. So we can't do stupid stuff that raises the scrutiny in a just irresponsible level. But I think given that, obviously there's going to be sex offenders that are going to be in our community. I would like to see us have an ordinance that says, a police officer can say, who are you, like you were saying, and there can be some teeth to some oversight. There's no place in our disc golf course that's completely unsupervised for a child sex offender. Our parks are not well visible, some of them. So that would be my greatest concern.
2 things. One, here's where the problem lies, which is that the individual who started this whole conversation was convicted of sex offense or sexual assault. He pled to a charge not of a minor, but as an adult, even though it was a child. Under your scenario, child sex offender, he wouldn't even be considered because of that. You'd have problems with definitions as to who constitutes what. You basically would have to say all sex offenders. Otherwise, you could not encapsulate. The problem is again, law enforcement needs to have some level, reasonable suspicion of activity in order to pursue or even to question. That's the 4th Amendment. And the 4th Amendment of the 7th Amendment of the Wisconsin Constitution. So we can't circumvent the state and federal constitution as far as what police officers can do. We can do it to a certain extent while we're trying to require disclosure, because then law enforcement would have an opportunity to at least ask the question. Otherwise, you're running a risk of a civil rights violation by even asking the question. It's going to be harassment. In response to your question, Eric, we don't have the ability to sit down. We have nothing. The Wisconsin Court of Appeals specifically said a municipality has no standing to be involved in a determination of where a sex offender is placed. That was the last decision that was issued. And so, because a municipality tried to do exactly that and require that the village have some say in where a sex offender is placed, and the state said, or the state Court of Appeals said, nope, sorry, you have no standing, dismiss the case with costs, which means that the municipality had to pay the attorney's fees and reasonable costs associated with defending the civil action that was brought by the municipality for that purpose. I understand what we're trying to do, but I make the same comment I've made repeatedly, which is that most of the sex offenses that occur are not by people on the sex offender registry, by family, they're by friends in the community that the children know and respect, and that's how they get away with it. In fact, the state or the county rep said at the last meeting that only 11% of sexual assaults are occurring with children by somebody that the child did not know.
I think that might even have been 7%.
I thought it was 11. Maybe I misheard it, but yeah, it's a small number. And you can create an ordinance, but how do you create an ordinance that's going to necessarily prevent Uncle Joe from doing something, or cousin Jimmy, or our friend who volunteers to babysit? These are very difficult situations, and I've made the comment, I'm not the village's attorney. I never wanted to be, I never have tried to be, but I don't check my experience and my training and my education at the door when I come in. And I can just tell you that this is going to be fraught with potential disaster. It's going to be expensive. It's not going to be effective. And I think it almost creates a false sense of security if we have something in place. What we should be doing is spending time with telling our parents, pay attention to what's going on. If your 17-year-old cousin likes to spend time with your 13-year-old cousin, maybe you should look at that a little more closely. If you have a family friend who's volunteering to babysit your children all the time, maybe you should look at that situation a little more closely, because that's where the big problems happen. And there are no easy answers. In fact, I heard a lecture once that said that only 10% of people in any profession know what they're talking about. And it's usually the same 10% who admit that they don't know what they're talking about. And so if you're ever talking to an accountant or a lawyer or an architect or whatever else, a doctor, and they are positive they are sure of what's going on, run. And I'm just telling you, I don't have an answer. I don't know what the right thing to do is. I just know when I see something that I think is potentially fraught with problems.
So if I could ask you a question. The old cop in me is kind of wondering, so if I see sex offender A just 3 or 4 or 5 times a week, walking up to get golf, what do you call it, disc golf course or whatever, the hairs in the back of my neck start standing up. Sooner or later, my big mouth's probably gonna get me in trouble, according to you, by me telling him, why are you always walking up this path? What are you up to? I don't wanna see you anymore.
You would have a problem, unfortunately, because you really need to have something. Nothing prevents you from following, from observing, watching, trying to investigate what's going on. It could just be that the individual likes to go on a walk, and that's the path that's easiest for him or her to walk. And, that's all that you can do. If there are children close by, again, this is where I came up with the concept of having permission from the agent. Where the person says, you need to have permission for your agent to enter into a village park or public or such village.
And realistically, how often is that going to happen?
Well, and that's just it. Because if you require such a thing, then police have reasonable suspicion to at least ask. They can stop the person. And if they don't have permission, they can be asked to leave. If they lie about having permission, then they're going to be placed on a probation hold and put in jail.
Plus obstruction.
Plus obstruction if it's pursued, yes. At the very least, we can put him in front of his honor and get a fine.
Thing that concerns me with that is they don't have the time. They simply don't have the time. They try to get a hold of a probation officer or a parole agent and see if you get a call back within the same few days, you're on the lucky side. They don't have time. And that would be where an ordinance, if an ordinance was in place, and again, what I'm suggesting, I'm not suggesting necessarily residents that we say where they can reside, that we just say that these are child safety zones. And I get that term from other ordinances that have been established. Something of a side note to consider is what Nakusa is going through right now, and they're creating an ordinance. So then there's also that, as people are, and this is the trend, that people are starting to take notice. Nakusa has an offender that apparently loiters around the library, and they don't have necessarily the teeth to do anything about it. They can't do anything about it. My understanding, this is a child sex offender, and he just keeps, for no good reason, hanging out about the library. If there was an ordinance, they could say, you can't be here. The probation and parole, it's, in my mind, closely related to our human services department in that they're overworked, their caseloads are impossible, and I think we're nearly negligent in leaving it on them because they can't do it. Their mission is to do it, but their ability to follow that to task is not reasonable, of no fault of their own. They simply have completely unmanageable caseloads. I don't think, and I agree that there's things that we need to be very careful of, and that's where I would ask that we just look at it more before making a decision, that we, really purposefully explore, get some, several ordinances, get several perspectives before we make a decision.
I guess one of my comments would be, how effective is an ordinance going to be? In other words, is that going to stop someone?
Well, for Nakusa, it would stop somebody from hanging
That
out about the
particular
library
one
and potentially creating that familiarity that is exactly the statistic that is shared. That's not saying a family member, it's saying that familiar person. That would be the person that is, you always see at the library sitting at the same place, that becomes familiar. Or the person shooting hoops and, hey, how about that? How about try it this way? And they're there, time after time. That's the familiarity. That falls into that statistical familiarity, the neighbor, the friend, You know, we're not talking about the person that drives up the road, snatches kids. We're talking, you know, and that's these child safety zones. That's what I would hope to accomplish, is avoiding the easiness of that familiarity.
So let me just, first of all, your comment about agents being overworked, that would be under my scenario to our advantage. Because if the offender can't reach his agent to get permission, he's not gonna have, or she is not gonna have permission. So that's gonna be a key point, because then they don't have permission for being there.
But that doesn't mean they don't do it. And I'm sorry, I don't mean to interrupt you, but the reason, that thing that sticks out in my mind is that particular person that has recently come into Port Edwards. His wife is writing letters to people saying all this different stuff that I don't think that the agents had any idea that he's staying there where he's not supposed to be. And, you know,
That, again, we have no control over that. As far as the rest goes, here's the problem, right? I drive every once in a while into town as opposed to going the opposite direction to go to my office. And I'll go by the crosswalk, okay? How far are we talking about a school safety zone? Are we talking about the fact that there's usually 3 or 4 kids that are standing on the opposite crosswalk from the crossing guard waiting to come across? Is that a child security zone?
and that would be yet to be determined. How many feet is reasonable? The 3,000 feet that Sun Prairie, that's ridiculous.
How do you keep kids in those safety zones?
Yeah,
You
and
don't.
what constitutes a safety zone? Right now, we've got the bike trail. Is that a safety zone?
And those are all things that would be open for discussion right now, do we proceed in exploring? Because those are all variable.
And the point I'm making is I've had this argument with my wife for 11 years because she's in HR and wanted a dress code in the office. And all I kept doing is punching holes in her concept. Well, you have to have a shirt with, no writing on it. Well, we had an employee who was a retired Navy petty officer. He wears a shirt that says Navy. So you're not going to tell him he can't wear his military shirt honoring his service to the country? Well, we'll allow that. Oh, so now you're going to allow Navy. Does that mean we also allow Marines and Army and Air Force? What about Coast Guard? What about Air Guard? What about, you can draw holes. That's the problem. Whenever you're trying to create anything with zones and with definitions, you open up the possibility that there's always going to be holes there that you can never resolve.
My question is, like, let's say that we say you can't go on the bike path without getting permission. And then he can never get permission because he can't get a hold of anybody. At any point, can he say that this is unconstitutional because I can't go for a walk?
No, but the thing is that every person on the sex offender list has to, by law, meet with their agent at a certain set time. And they have to go through, and there are rules of probation and parole that they have to sign on. And if they're in there and they're talking about those rules, that's their opportunity. Oh, I want to be able to go and play basketball or shoot some hoops at the public park, and I have to have permission to go there. Can we put that in my rules? So they're going to have an opportunity to bring it up. It's going to circumvent, hey, I'm going to go watch the girls' volleyball game at the high school tonight. And I can't get my agent, but what the heck, I'm just going to go anyway.
So that would be if we created an ordinance saying they had to have permission, that would still lead us back to it would have to be an ordinance, because right now,
Correct. And again, and the problem I have is, during the day, if the sex offender's hanging out at the Nakusa library, who's he gonna be bothering? Because the children aren't there, they're in school. Summer is different, I can think of worse places that I would want somebody with a criminal record to be than trying to, if they're actually trying to read and educate themselves. it's just an open kettle of fish, so. Anyway, I've spoken enough. I guess, does anybody else have any other comments or comment or questions? And if so, I'd just kind of like to have some sort of an idea of whether we should go forward with anything or not.
So you want an up or down?
Kind
Is that
of,
what you're asking?
well, yes, go back and see what you can come up with, or just forget it.
My inclination, I'll just go ahead and say, I don't think an ordinance is going to be effective for what we're trying to accomplish. And I understand why parents, are concerned and why they might be concerned, but I'm not sure those are well-founded. I'm not sure those are well-founded. I guess I don't think it would be effective and accomplish what we want it to. And you've already spoken to quite a bit of that. And I think this is a broad generalization, but I think it really comes down to what kids view in relationships with their parents' friends, how they learn to view themselves and learn to view people that can cause problems for them. In other words, can abuse them or sexually offend in some manner. And so a lot of the responsibility, and granted, we've talked to Kyle Cronin about this too, and he's sort of agreed, but he's more than busy, and so it's the school right now, to have some type of where you cover relationships and what's healthy and what isn't in a school setting. And that's looking at a long-term, not even solutions. I mean, it'll never be solved. It'll never be an issue that's totally solved. So yeah, I really do not see an ordinance accomplishing that. I could see if we do want people who have homeschool, are homeschooling, to report that to the police chief or whatever, that I think does have a good view. I think the whole police department is doing their job as well as they can related to sex offenders. But that's where I'm coming from.
Us as a village, we cannot protect, family members or things that we don't know of. We only can set rules for things that we are aware of. So I think the only recourse that you can have in an ordinance is something that mimics the rules and regulations of their parole. Because then if you create an ordinance that speaks to whatever they already have to do and they fail to do that, then we as a village have an ordinance, we can go directly, maybe not, maybe we can go directly to our police without waiting to hear back from their parole and whoever, parole agent. If it mirrors that and they can't get a hold and we know that they failed to do something, then we can go to Scott and Scott can take care of it right away. That's about all we can do. We're not in the households to protect family members. So I think we need more information. If we just, I don't know.
Bonds, can you approach council and ask if statutorily we can require a copy of their rules of probation and parole to be filed with our police department?
Are they, or is that what you're asking?
I would like to know whether
Okay.
legally we could do that,
Okay, that's a good question.
because if we could, maybe that's where an ordinance would be, then the officers would know who's potentially violating the rules of probation and can act accordingly.
The chair would like to ask the body a question. Since by ordinance, I have the authority to call special board meetings and such. Do you think we should have a meeting and discuss action on this matter? Or do you think that we can just, if we decide not to do anything, just leave it at that? Or would you like to have an official vote after another discussion with the attorney here. What would be your feelings on that?
We have that, wouldn't we have to open it up and allow public comment?
I would just keep it in the committee. I would keep it in the committee or have an adjunct or something. Just so we don't have 7 different trains of thought. I think that just muddies the water.
Well, Chairman Duncan has enough on his plate. Anybody, second thought I have is to form a 3-member special committee to look into this with the attorney. Can we do anything? Or is it a thing where we're just gonna have, yeah, we can have an ordinance, but it's directed directly to the police? If you follow me?
Yeah.
What's your feelings on that?
I would be supportive of an ad hoc committee.
That's what I.
Okay, now my next,
I mean, we already have what's the equivalent of one, because we have a 3-member committee addressing it through Pitt. So,
well, if you want to still have it in Pitt, but I think we should have Nick there, and then we come out of that meeting. We either are, we aren't.
all right,
Go ahead.
I was gonna say, are we tossing aside then what Nick presented to us at the last, was that at the last pit meeting?
I don't think so, but Dana had a
Okay.
specific thing that he wanted asked of him.
well, and to that extent, since I'm the chair of that committee, I would assume, communicate directly with council and say, these are the things that I would like to have you research and have available, so that when we meet, we're addressing these issues specifically. The problem I had was, is that there's a certain lawyer speak, it's in any profession, but reading Nick's comments on the side of the ordinances, he did everything he could to say, don't do this, without saying, don't do this.
I agree with that. But this would be my suggestion. That yes, we keep it in Pitt. And yes, I think you should, Mr. Chairman, speak with Nick one-on-one. And then come back and report to your committee, because Tier is on the committee and Sue's on the committee. And then I don't know if I can do this, Boz, you help me out here, but I would say we just let it live or die in committee.
Problem I have is, in order to have the meeting effective, there would have to be some information that would have to go to the committee. I can't present it, because then we have a quorum issue.
Yeah.
What I would suggest is just for the record, is I approach Nick with my set of questions, outline them, have him address them, and then he can send, since it's a request for legal counsel to the board, there's attorney-client privilege that would attach, so it's not a open meetings issue.
Negative quorum or anything like
Yep,
that.
he could then send the communications directly with the 2 of you in advance of the meeting. So that you would
Advance of
have it to look at and consider
your meeting.
in front of my meeting.
And we would like to do that
March
next month.
3rd. Yep,
I think you gotta have it done by March because the elections are in April.
yep, it's getting so far afield. I'd like to either have it figured out or,
Before the
One way
new
to-
board is
Yep.
situated, absolutely.
Is there a point in taking it back to committee, or is it a waste of time? If Dana has said he's voting it down and Sue is voting it down,
I think it was a flip of the coin until Dana brought that part up about meeting with Nick. I think that would, we're all gonna know, okay, this is either we can continue or it's over based on client attorney privilege with the 3 of you.
And I'm willing to still, maintain an open mind about that. Those are my feelings that I
Yeah,
express,
and-
so
yeah.
it's possible.
and I don't have a problem as long as it's along the lines of what I've outlined, which I think is constitutional. I think we can put restraints on them consistent with their rules and regulations for being on probation, because a probationer is not a full citizen. They do not have the right to vote as long as they're on probation or parole. Once in Wisconsin, they're finished up being on paper, they can vote. But that's the extent of it. The probation agent can go into your home with less than reasonable suspicion and search. Because again, you don't have full rights. So there's certain aspects that come into play here that I think would be potentially, there might be room for us to do something. I'm just not sure how much.
Okay, so we're looking at 5 PM, 3 March 2022.
Yep.
Does everybody agree that this will continue or will end with the committee? I see no sense to bring it back to the full board unless we're gonna go forward with it.
I don't agree. I don't agree.
Okay, so that'll be up to the committee. If the committee decides not to bring it to the board,
Then any trustee can bring something to
They
the
can bring
You want to bring it to the full board?
Yes. I think it's a lot of responsibility, and it's 3 people that would be saying whether this is dead or something happens with it.
well, Mr. Chairman, if you could give a due diligence one more time, and trustee Grundon, if you wish to bring it up to the board. Boz, we will have that discussed / action, so the board can take action in March. Is that okay with everybody?
And quite frankly, I'll say it on record that if it's anywhere close, I would probably agree to move it out of committee to present it to the board, but with the understanding that that would be to bring it to the full board. I would reserve the right to change my vote when it got to the full board.
It's your prerogative.
I'm just stating it up front.
Okay.
I don't like to have hidden agendas.
All righty, can I safely say we'll move on now? Okay. All right, item 10, village administrator.
You have your village report there. We obviously just started the year, so we're low in our numbers of budget execution and payroll, no issues there. We are still working through the submission for our windstorm damage. We got some questions to answer and then send some information back. We submitted our, we had all the projects we were executing in 2022, our public works projects. So we took advantage of the federal money, and all of those 5 projects, plus 2 more for Bunker and Range Line Road, we submitted under the federal grant program to get the 80%, 80-20 match. So they pay 80, we only pay 20. So they went in, very good likelihood of them getting approved. And if that's the case, then basically Uncle Sam will give us about $600,000, and we will only have to spend about $150,000 of our budgeted 2022 money. If that happens, then we'll come back through FHR to ask that we roll forward money back into the 400 account for future projects. So that'll be good news if we get the federal money. And that gives us a lot of opportunities in the next 3 years for Second Street and a lot of other large end projects that we
can do a lot of stuff underneath the pavement then.
full projects. This was only resurfacing this year, but we can definitely do a lot of full projects to include any new roads that we feel we need to add to the village for future developments. This is the advantage to get that, because that'd be $1 million project. So you see public safety, no burning issues there. We did submit, or I got the, Kelly finished up the grant for the firemen tonight. I'll look at it one more time and then we'll hit send on that. We're asking for about $5,000 of the state's $50,000 for helping with a student program in our schools, as well as recent graduates, to bring them into our fire department and basically an apprentice type program. So we'll see how that goes with submission. We did submit a FEMA grant for $480,000 for basically all new gear, to include a brush truck and a few other high dollar items there. Again, a lot of federal money out there. We'll see how it goes with that. That'll be a big bonus if we get that.
Is that part of ARPA too?
No, separate FEMA. Yeah. Yeah, concerns on budget execution, we're still working, the work studies. We should get a few new ones possibly in the spring session here. So we'll see them come through. Working through with also the University of Madison offered a program where they provide subject matter experts as well as students class type projects to help municipalities. So we submitted a couple ideas of housing, green footprint, land planning, and we're going to see if they want to take it up. They basically use it as a teaching tool. They provide us a product. They can conduct a briefing to us as y'all as a board, and then we do with it what we will. So I think it's free money, free projects, but it brings a lot of big brains from down south. How you feel about Madison, but big brains from down there to help us to expand and amplify our ability to do a lot of that stuff.
I've yet to find too many big brains in that.
It's-
Big egos.
Yes, yes. We should hear back from Legacy here shortly, the next week or so, if we are into phase 3. So we'll see how that goes. And one addition you see in there is provided you the deer management report. There were some questions from a few trustees of how's that program going. So this is the report that he provides us for your information purposes. Tells you how many deer were captured and or terminated in Port Edwards and compared to our neighbors north and south, and some good information about the program in general. So they're doing what they're supposed to be doing, and they do highlight some concerns with baiting and so on that they're working through DNR with, and we'll keep them apprised of any issues that arise. This is mainly in, again, they only support us on village property. These are not guys and gals going out throughout the village on personal property unless they have a contract with a personal landowner, an individual. But for us, it's Ripple Creek and the school forest is where I focus them on for the herd that's in that area, if there's much of a herd left there anyways.
There is.
There is.
Oh, yeah.
There is.
They're not by me.
They love to run between me and Millis, at least according to my dog.
That's all I have. So if your question.
Okay, any questions for Boz?
Yeah, what's the time frame? I mean, it says 5 in the village, but over what period?
It started,
September,
with the season and it ended, I guess.
January.
Is that,
Should be.
yeah.
That's when bow season is.
Yep.
Okay. So, all right.
Patricia?
Oh, yeah, an election matter. I received a email from Trent Miner, the Wood County clerk. And he's informing us that in 2023, they're replacing the auto marks with express votes. It's a requirement. We have no choice. And it's going to be about $3,500. That'll have to be figured into the budget for 2023. And that is an elected down election year because there's only 2 elections that year. So it should be okay.
What does that mean?
Well, the auto mark is that machine, not the one that counts the votes, but the one that you can go to and hit a screen and then it'll print your ballot for you.
Never seen that.
We've never had that, right?
Yeah, we do.
Oh.
Okay, where your voting booths are, then there's that table
Oh,
it's
yeah.
set up there.
Oh,
Usually only about 1 or 2 people use it.
I
okay.
thought it was
And
just
it's
for
really
people
big
to sit
about-
down.
Feeling feels, jam
think
my
we
ballot
have
in
to
my
Spend
face. You just grab it.
$3,500
You're doing
for
this will be
something
a lot
that people don't
smaller.
use.
Oh. It's a requirement, because
Yeah.
it's for the handicap mostly.
Oh, okay.
Yep.
Along this line, I'm
Just
sorry, I have to
remember that we're being taped.
I know, I have to bring this up. Apparently, one of the candidates for Attorney General indicated that poll watchers, if they feel that there is inappropriate behavior, or should unplug the machines. Do we want to potentially think about having a plan in place if somebody decides to start trying to unplug the machines?
I could see if Chief Drew will re-swear me in.
Well, because otherwise, it'll be me, because I'm the one who's usually on call, at least on one political persuasive, on one party. In the boiler room in Madison, they'll call me and have me come over and raise hell. And I'd rather be done in advance as opposed to me having to take time out of my day to come over and raise a big stink.
Moving.
Something else to worry about.
Yeah.
Anyway, I've had a lot of crazy ideas for election day and my wife told me to forget them or I can't go home. So I'll forget them. Okay, where am I? Trustee comments. Chief, you've been awful quiet. You have anything to say, sir?
No, everything's good.
You got a Weller day too. All righty, Boz, you take us through the committee calendar if you would.
Have the dates there. The next one, next week, Public Works on the 17th. Followed by Parks, or correction, 16th. Next Wednesday, we're doing the Planning Commission for zoning issues. The zoning committee has been informed that is open to any other trustee that wants to show up. The main topics that will be discussed is future planning for the village and an adjustment to the zoning code to include an institutional and a multi-use category that we do not have right now. So they'll take that up as discussion. And we are trying to clean up a lot of old pre-zoning rules to be in compliance state rules. So your churches, your schools, your government properties, they are all conditional uses. We don't have any documentation to say they're conditional use by state law. So we're having to basically codify it, qualify them as a conditional use approved by the Planning Commission. It's just to make sure we're above board so no one questions moving forward. And if a church or a school or somebody wants to start any type of improvements in the near future with outbuildings or whatnot, then that's the start point to be an official conditional use property, because otherwise they won't get a state permit. So we got to do some housekeeping. Those will be discussed next week. 17th, following that is Public Works. The next week, 24th at 4 is Parks and Rec. And then we're back to our cycle first week of the month. Public Safety, FHR on the 3rd, and PIT following that. And the Village Board on 8 March. If there is a not public safety, Police and Fire Commission, it'll be on the 28th, the last day of February, if they are, and more to follow on that. So
How's Gary doing?
I haven't heard from him in a couple of days.
Pardon?
I haven't heard from him in a couple of days. He was here last week.
Did he go down to Madison?
Yeah. He started his thing.
Because it'll depend, because I don't think Scott will be back till the end of March.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's really based on, Chief, you got up, you gonna have a candidate ready for him or probably not?
Depends if our membership committee can get through the interview process.
Yeah,
So
okay.
it's kind of.
So it may be pushed into later in March.
Okay,
About 90% sure I will not be here for the March 8th meeting.
okey-doke.
I'm supposed to be in Richmond.
Give me a text. Let me know. All right, if there is nothing else to be brought before the board, I will adjourn the meeting at 7:58 PM.